Hi everyone, and welcome to our e-commerce corner today. Thank you all for being with us. My name is Marie Claire and I'm joined today by Gavin Flood from AdRoll, and he'll be sharing his insights into omnichannel marketing and how brands can win big using omnichannel marketing. So as always, we will record this session for those that can't be with us today. We will also share with that afterwards in a follow-up email. Also, we will share some related content in our LinkedIn community, e-commerce experts, and we would love you all to join us. There will be a question and answer session at the end, so 5 minutes at the end after Gavin's presentation here today. And please don't hesitate, don't hold back to ask lots of questions in the Q&A section. So over to you, Gavin.
Marie Claire, thank you very, very much and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. Time is short. We have an awful lot to cover, so I'm going to jump straight in. You've heard Marie Claire introduce me. I'm VP of Marketing at AdRoll, which is a marketing and ads platform for e-commerce brands. But what is it that we do? So indulge me just for a moment while I give a little bit of context, because it's very important in relation to the topic of omni-channel marketing. So what we do at AdRoll is we allow e-commerce brands to run their display ads, to run social ads, email campaigns, and more, all in one place. The platform itself is driven by AI-driven shopper intelligence, and the connected impact of all of that is to be able to deliver a seamless experience across multiple channels for the customers that engage with our brands. And if that sounds an awful lot like omni-channel marketing to you, well, good, because it should. It's very close to the heart of how we operate as a platform, and ultimately it's actually very well embedded in our DNA. And to, again, just give a little bit of further context on that, if you go back as far as 2007, when we were first formed by Aaron Bell, pictured here, you can see the origin story almost develops in line with how thinking around omni-channel marketing has developed. Back in 2007, Aaron at the time, he was working with his wife to try and launch a energy bar into the market. And they were trying to grow their reach. They had been in a lot of the physical outlets that they needed to be, but they started to think about blogs that they could engage with to try and increase visibility of the brand. And in putting together those lists of blogs, and the idea of creating a community around this for easy access came to Aaron. The idea then morphed into publisher tools and then advertiser tools, and ultimately AdRoll was born from that. And you fast forward almost 15 years, and while Aaron still has great hair, as you can see from this, it's gotten a little bit grayer, but AdRoll in that time has gone from 1 customer to 37,000 and annually generates over 246 billion in sales for e-commerce brands. But, and this is the important point, through all of that, an anchor in all of this is a lesson that Aaron learned very, very early, is that success comes not from being everywhere with your brand, but being everywhere your customer is. And all of that brings us back to the reason why we're here today, which is to talk about omni-channel marketing. There's no official dictionary description of omni-channel marketing. So what I've done is I've kind of collated a lot of different views on this into one that I really think hits the mark around what it is. And for me, it's the practice of providing a seamless, high quality customer experience across multiple touch points. And the theme that you're going to hear over and over from me over the next few minutes is that focus on the customer rather than the individual channel. And that's really, really important. If you're to take anything away from this session, is to focus on the customer, not on the channel. We all live in an environment where we are very channel orientated, but that can be a little bit challenging, because a misunderstanding I hear an awful lot is that omni-channel marketing, it's the same as multi-channel marketing, because both disciplines interact and involve and engage with customers across multiple touch points. But in practice, they are fundamentally different. I'll explain why. Multi-channel marketing considers each channel to be its own silo with its own set of goals and objectives. And by being in silos, each channel sees an incomplete and slightly different view of the same customer. That's represented in the graphic on the left. On the right, you see omni-channel marketing, where you put the customer at the heart of everything, and it assumes that the customer is interacting with you across multiple channels. In fact, it encourages that because that's a means of driving engagement. And customers who interact with your brands across multiple channels, they are much, much more engaged. That's just not something that you can say, based on assumptions. There's a lot of research around this, and one piece in particular from Omnichannel shows that engagement rates for brands operating omni-channel strategies is in the region around 19%, compared to those running single channel campaigns, which is about 5.4%. So 3.5x engagement rates for an omni-channel strategy. That's pretty compelling in terms of a rationale for adoption. Here's another one. Customers who interact with your brand across multiple channels, they spend more. And a Harvard Business Review has got some really interesting insight on this, and that is that omni-channel customers spend on average about 9% more on average than those with either single or dual channel interaction with a brand. And that's not just for spend, that is something that carries through repeatedly. So omnichannel has that cascading effect in terms of being able to drive stronger connection with consumers as well, which is really, really important. It's also important to note that both of these statistics are pre-COVID. Back in early 2020, when omnichannel marketing, it could have been considered something as a nice to have, but now omnichannel, it is key to survival. I would reckon that all of us have seen this graph at some stage over the last 2 years. It's the famous graph from McKinsey that shows that at the very start of COVID, we experienced in the e-commerce space 10 years of growth in a little over 3 months. In the USA alone, the number of e-commerce shoppers has jumped to 250 million. In Europe, it's over 350 million. And the numbers behind this are pretty staggering. From eMarketer, they say that retail e-commerce sales worldwide, they're going to grow 12.12% this year. They're going to reach 5.5 trillion. And by 2025, they're going to reach 7 trillion. So the great acceleration, it is happening. So in that regard, you cannot afford to either be targeting the wrong customer, treating the customer the same in multiple interactions. It is so important to build that connection with a customer. And that's really, really key, and what we're going to try and talk about in a couple of moments, because customers crave connection. 72% of online shoppers said that they would change brands because of a disconnected customer experience. We're all shoppers. We can all relate to that. We've all had frustrations around engagement with particular brands, whether it's inconsistent message, experience, emotions. So a statistic like this shouldn't surprise. Omnichannel marketing, it can and should be the answer to these challenges, but there's a reason why not all brands are doing it, or at least doing it well. And it's because the system is somewhat stacked against you, and it comes back to that difference between multi-channel and omnichannel. Omnichannel is hard because existing marketing systems, they're built at a channel level. Every channel from billboards to Facebook to email, they measure success on their terms. So every channel will claim to have the greatest influence on your customer's likelihood to buy. So the burden is on you, the marketer, to instead think of the customer and to have a customer first perspective rather than a channel first perspective. So how do you go and do that? Well, the bad news is that it is difficult, but the good news is that it's only difficult to do well. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is just giving you a perspective around 4 key elements of omni-channel strategy that if you can adopt and leverage and continue to optimize around, you're going to set yourself on a pretty good path. So starting with the first one, which is around customer data and audience. This is different to analytics and analysis, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It is about organizing your data and your audience in a way that makes it accessible, easy to operationalize, and to be able to get impact from. Really, really important to be deliberate about this, to think about systems that you use that will help to move at pace and engage audiences. I'll give you a good example of this. Beauty mega shop Sephora, they have an online membership program, And at the beginning of COVID, they looked to use this to replicate the in-store experience. Things like workshops, makeovers, product testing, for example. They started to very quickly move and operationalize their data that they would have had on customers, bring it online, start to think about, the various different motions, the various different call to actions, the messaging, building a path for customers that would bring them along a journey and continuously engaging with them. So in doing that, being able to access data very easily, to be able to operationalize it, to be able to move it out of silos is really, really important. And they've seen big impact for this. They have 10 million members, and those members on their website, they spend 15 times more than those who don't have this nurtured relationship, which is driven by easy access and operationalization, that's easy for me to say, of your data. So critical. And this is grounded in the type of systems that you pick, how they work with your existing systems, how you build your marketing stack. Really, really, really important that you're deliberate about that. The next step is to structure your marketing team in a way that holds them accountable for technology and not just simply channel execution. So what I mean by that is one of the biggest mistakes that e-commerce brands make is just simply organizing teams around budgets and channels rather than your audience or your customer. We've all seen this. Brands that have somebody responsible for website, display, social, content, etc., etc. And if that is the level of structure without oversight on top of that, you're going to create silos, you're going to create inconsistent messages and experiences. You have to be cognizant of that. To shift toward digital, it requires a new level of collaboration between teams. And for some organizations, this has manifested itself in the creation of new roles and ways of working. And we've had to adapt to that in AdRoll as well. And I'm a case study in this. We have a team set up at a channel level who operate for display, for website, for social. But sitting on top of that, we have individuals who are responsible for specific segments of our customer base. I'm responsible for one in particular, and it's my responsibility to make sure that I am orchestrating all of those channels, working with those owners to create a consistent experience across them in making sure that what the customer sees as they go from display to social to website is consistent. You don't want a display ad that is speaking about one thing and a landing page and website experience is speaking about another. It might seem very straightforward and, oh, sure, that would never happen. It does, and creeps in when you do not have that level of oversight and somebody with that audience view of all of your channels. Really, really important. The next piece is ensuring that your messaging isn't disjointed across platforms and channels. A study by Lifecycle Marketing has found that 2/3 of brands have found this a really, really hard thing to do. Sometimes it's down to limited time, sometimes it's down to limited resources, and the growth in channels is only making this harder. When you shift your focus from channels to customer experiences, you need to be able to understand your buyer persona, how you're segmenting your audiences, and then you need to work to deliver the right message and the right channels. The buyer persona piece is interesting, really, really important in terms of being able to understand what it is that your customer, what is important to them, what is their pain, what are they looking for, how do they like to engage. All of that is really, really important, and then operationalizing that. So messaging that is consistent across channels is really, really important. And then the last piece, probably the most important element, is data and analysis. Because in the absence of robust data and insight into what's working and not working, you do not know what levers to pull, what needs to be optimized, where there is friction in your customer journey. All of that is for nothing unless you can land on the metrics piece very, very effectively. And in doing that, you need to figure out a couple of things. You need to figure out, order of operations here, because if you don't have good structure around this as a starting point, it's going to be very, very difficult. What I mean by that is you need to start by landing on what is your output metric. What is the single data point that you want to optimize towards as a brand owner, as a budget owner? This could be the number of new customers that you bring to your business. It could be the cost of acquiring those customers. Let's assume for sake of argument that it's the number of new customers is the thing that you are held accountable for, and that's the thing that you're constantly optimizing towards. When you know what your output metric is, what is the thing that you are held accountable for, you can start to think about, well, what are the input metrics that are going to help me deliver on that? You need to come up with about 4 or 5 of these. So if you're an e-commerce brand, the first thing you're going to say is traffic to my website. That's a pretty important input metric. I need to be measuring that. Great. Visits to core pages feels like another really important one. You can't just say, great, getting loads of traffic to my site, my job is done. They're not moving to your core pages. So they're your product pages, your pricing pages, your shopping cart. That's a problem. You need to make sure that you're monitoring that. Browser abandonment rate, another really important one, as is how many are abandoning their cart. You need to be understanding, your input metrics and finding what they are and the ones that are important to your brand. It's not an exhaustive list. These are not the ones that I'm advocating for. I'm simply giving an example of how you should be thinking about this. And then once you've got your input metrics, you need to start to think about this like a production line. These are all stages in a line that leads to the customer acquisition. What I mean by that is your input metrics should be sequential. They should flow like your customer journey. Again, thinking about this in terms of customer experience across channels, consistency. Your output metrics should have the same mindset, or your input metrics should follow that same logic. How are people moving through the customer journey? That's really, really important, because if there's a problem with customer acquisition numbers, you're quickly able to identify what stage is it at, and then look to understand what's happening. So for example, let's take for illustrative purposes, traffic to core pages. You're seeing that's dropping. You're measuring it, you're seeing it dropping. So in understanding that, you can open the hood and start to say, do we need to think about new messaging? Do we need to think about new call to actions? Do we need to think about maybe even new motions around this page to help move people forward? And as important as establishing input metrics is, the mindset around how you fix and operationalize these is equally important. And I like this production line analogy because it brings a level of clarity, focus, and it helps in creating a common language to orientate everybody around in the business. Analytics and insights can be complicated. It can be overwhelmed by talk of attribution and insights, and that can be a little bit difficult. One of the important things that you need to do is, in creating a culture around data, is to create a way of talking about it that everybody can align on. That is so, so important as well. Many times we've been in meetings and there's 2 or 3 different ways or 2 or 3 different perspectives that different teams come at measurement and talking about the impact of the work they have. It's very difficult to stitch all of these together. You need to create that common language. So now that we spent some time unpacking all of these pieces, I'm going to give an example maybe of just a brand who I think is doing this really, really well. They're doing the omni-channel piece really, really effectively. And for me, Lounge Apparel, who are a UK-based e-commerce brand who started back in 2015 when 2 founders came together with a passion to create a line of stylish underwear and home apparel. They started with 2 employees, have grown to 120. They've broken through the $70 million a year revenue threshold, and they're now competing on 2 continents. 7 years, 70 million. It's a really, really impressive growth story. And if you talk to their founders, you talk to their CMO, they will constantly talk about the customer and their focus on the customer. And this is not just around the product that they build, but how they engage with them. They are very deliberate on this. And I'll give you an example of how they think about this. They understand where the customers are and they meet them there. Instagram is a huge, huge channel for them. They understand that their followers engage with them in a very meaningful way on Instagram. So they focus on building a presence there. They've got 2.3 million followers on Instagram. And this is the jump off point for the beginning of the relationship with their brand. Visitors who come and see that page, they're presented with high quality lifestyle and product photography that showcases like the really extensive range of apparel that they have. Visitors can then click on through to the brand's online store, which offers resources on style and fit, as well as incentives to purchase. So again, think about this. They're thinking about the customer journey, thinking about that they've gone from one channel to the other. They're building on the relationship. They're not just sending people from an Instagram page, which is, hey, buy now, go to a website, you're seeing with another buy now message, and then you click on something else and there's another buy now with maybe an incentive. They're bringing them on the journey. They're thinking about how the experience builds. Instagram, great experience around what the product looks like and engaging around it. You come through to the page, helping you in terms of kind of figure out what you might want, giving suggestions, opportunities to get involved with the mailing list, which you're more disposed of because of the experience you've had so far. And all of this is underpinned by a consistency around messaging, visuals, creative, and a set of call to actions that build on each other. You won't see a buy now or purchase now button with Lounge until you start to get deep into the relationship with them. So really, really, really deliberate. They do an awful lot of work to test call to actions, to test creative. They just have this maniacal focus on creating a really deliberate path for customers. It's not rocket science. It's very, very focused on meeting customers where they are and building out from that. And that's what omni-channel marketing is all about. So it's a really, really great example. And it's paid off. They have seen a 388% increase in revenue from social channels and a 78% decrease in audience acquisition because they've been able to dial this in so effectively. So we have covered a lot of ground over the last 15 minutes or so. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I just want to take a moment maybe just to kind of take a pause and then just recap on the 4 key elements to an effective omni-channel marketing strategy. We set the scene a little bit in terms of, why it is important, meeting customers where they're at, responding to higher expectations from a customer. I saw, you saw what I shared, around 72% of customers who would go elsewhere because of a disconnected experience. That's really, really important. Competition is growing. The challenge in terms of share of mind is equally as important as share of wallet. You need to be very deliberate in terms of your strategy in building lasting relationship with customers. Omnichannel is a way of doing it. It's hard, but it's only hard to do well. And these 4 principles, I do believe, are a way of helping you get further along that journey. Number 1, prioritize technology that is optimized for speedy and agile data activation. Don't be wooed by the next hot piece of tech that you can plug into your stack. Think about this deliberately. Does it work with what I already have? Is it easy to very quickly take what I'm seeing there, take insights from it, and operationalize it over there? Organize in a way that holds teams accountable for your audience rather than your channel. You see a lot of titles out there, Chief Customer Officer, and that is no more than having this view around what is happening from a customer experience perspective across all the channels rather than having that single siloed channel approach. Ensuring your messaging is consistent, really, really important. Think about what you're doing from stage to stage, channel to channel, and have consistency around how that's executed. That might mean making sure that one person is responsible for your messaging, rather than saying having one person write emails, one person write website copy. That creates inconsistency. If that's the way you're set up and need to do, make sure you have clear brand guidelines that help drive that. And then lastly, land on your North Star output metric. So important. Think about it from a sequential perspective. Look at what inputs are based on what your output metric is and go and operationalize against it. And finally, this is important. Omni-channel marketing, it's a journey. It's not a destination. Customer tastes, they change, preferences change, priorities will always change. COVID has proved that. And it's not just COVID. There is so much from a technology and from a preferences perspective that's constantly driving change. It's a journey. Your work is never finished here, but it's about mindset, it's about focus, and it's about taking things one step at a time. Okay, let's take a breath. I'm going to hand back to Marie-Claire now because I do believe there's a few questions that we want to get to, so I want to leave some time for that.
Yes, we have a lot of questions here today, which is fantastic, and we're actually running over already, but I hope you all stay with us anyway. Those that don't get their questions answered, We're going to add them in our LinkedIn community as well and answer them there or via email as well. So no problems if we don't get round to your questions. Thank you, Gavin. I thought it was extremely insightful and actually linked to our other two ecom sessions that we had previously about being customer centric, about really making sure that you have data throughout that customer journey, that it's a synergy, and also within your organization as well. So both sides of the wheel. So I'm just going to hit it off, and we have the first question is, how long does it take to establish an omni-channel strategy?
Difficult question to answer. It's a bit like how long is a piece of string. So I'll give some perspective on this rather than kind of putting a number on it. The first thing I'd say is you got to think about this in terms of what's important to you. Is it incremental growth or is it exponential growth? If it's incremental growth, i.e. I'm happy what I have and want to have small improvements over time, you know, you're going to continue to do what you're doing. Omni-channel marketing is going to deliver exponential growth. And what I mean by that is you're going to go through this difficult phase where rather than your graph going like this, it's going to level off before it starts to take off and actually surpass your incremental growth line. There's some great research on incremental versus exponential growth from Harvard Business Review. If you look it up, you'll find it. It's really interesting to see because you will have that difficult stage while you think about, you know, what are my metrics? How do I set up the team right? How do I think about getting the right messaging in place? So what I will say is that give yourself 3 months to go and do that if you're starting from a multi-channel perspective right now. But that assumes that you've got reasonable hygiene around data, you've got a good understanding of what are the things that you want to be measuring, and you are able to measure them. Most importantly, do you have good insights and analytics to help support all of that? And do you have the resources to go and execute on that? If you've got a good starting point on that, 3 months is a good time frame to be able to stand this up, operationalize it, and start to kind of get some feedback.
Great. And in regards to data, actually, we have another great question from Olive Russell. She says, with the changes in privacy and giving people more control over their data, how do you accurately measure the overall success and individual successes of your omni-channel marketing efforts with a view to optimizing and scaling?
I would assume the inference under here is, you know, third-party cookie deprecation and how do you start to think about shifting beyond third-party cookies. A couple of things in mind here. The growth of first-party data is obviously going to be key here. You've seen in the example I've shared of Lounge the focus on collecting emails, but collecting it very deliberately, creating an experience that engages an audience that helps to lead towards creating somebody's willingness to share that data. That's a really strong pool of first-party data, which you can model off and start in terms of thinking about things like contextual advertising and understanding where you need to be placing your focus from an audience build and engagement perspective. Contextual is nothing new, but what it is it's a very deliberate way for you to think about where my audience, what are the things that are important to them, and starting to kind of build your presence around that as informed by some of your first-party data. So I think they are the things that you need to start thinking about. We could go very, very deep on that question, but I think just there two columns I would say as a starting point.
Yes, definitely. And I think in regards to our solution here, it's certainly collecting zero-party data seems to be a trend that's growing as well. So really speaking to your customers, getting that data and using that optimally as well. Just the last one, and we promise we will answer all of these questions in due time, but we only have 1 minute. Well, we're going 5 minutes over, but I just want to get as much questions as we can. So you spoke about working backwards from your output metrics to understand your input metrics. How do you start this, and how many should you have?
Rule of thumb here, 1 or 2 at most. You know, we spoke about number of new customers in the example I gave. The value of those customers could be a secondary output metric. Cost per acquisition could be a secondary output metric. I think you will have 1 and then maybe some data points around that, but you really should have 1 North Star that you're working towards. And then you got to move backwards. You will start to maybe come up with, you know, what are the 30 to 40 input metrics that will influence them? And the trick at this point is to start with a big bucket and think about all of the various stages of the consumer journey to understand which are the drivers and which are the dependencies. And in doing that, you're able to kind of like hone in on what are the ones that are most important, the most measurable, and you have the ability to influence most. And that gets you down to about 5 or 6. And that is a really, really, really useful way of doing that. It's actually a mindset that is that Amazon have done a lot of work to try and really operationalize in their business. And that whole phraseology of working backwards is somewhat of a mantra in that business. And it's a really, really interesting perspective. So if you ever get a chance, I know we have a lot of reading recommendations, but Working Backwards from the team at Amazon is a really, really interesting read around this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gavin. And we'll make sure to link these suggestions and content articles that Gavin has been mentioning in our LinkedIn community. Again, apologies for going over time, but I think it's been such an insightful session with you, Gavin, today. It's been incredibly enjoyable. There's a lot of questions that we didn't get around to answering. So we will definitely share those within our community. Thank you, Gavin, once again, and we hope that you'll be back again joining us in an Econ Corner later in the future, perhaps. It's been incredibly exciting today to learn more about omnichannel marketing. But from us now, just farewell, and we'll see you again, hopefully in June for our next session.